What if the world you know was built upon a silence echoing from empires erased, from languages lost, and from peoples turned into footnotes? Before flags were planted and borders drawn, the Americas were alive with civilizations, complexity, and culture. Then came the ships, the steel, and the disease. Colonization wasn't a single act. It was centuries of conquest, resistance, transformation, and tragedy. This is the full story, from the rise of the Maya to the revolutions that ended empires. This is the colonization of the Americas. Before European sails touched Atlantic winds, the Americas pulsed with vibrant civilizations. The Olmec carved giant stone heads as early as 1500 BCE, laying the foundations of future empires. To the north, the Mississippians raised earthen mounds that touched the sky, while to the south, the Maya charted the stars with unmatched precision. This land was not new. It was ancient, with systems of writing, agriculture, and cosmology beyond what Europe understood. The Andes cradled the Nazca, and eventually the Inca, who built highways in the clouds and cities stitched into mountains. In the Caribbean, the Taino and Arawak thrived with trade, complex social order, and maritime expertise. Millions lived in these lands, connected not by conquest, but by cultural webs woven across generations. Before colonization, there were over 2,000 languages, countless belief systems, and intricate governments. The myth that the Americas were empty or savage was a convenient lie told by conquerors. This was a world of empires, farmers, poets, astronomers, and warriors. And soon it would be invaded by outsiders who came not to learn but to claim. In 1492, 3 ships left Spain, chasing Asia but colliding with the Caribbean. Columbus landed on islands already inhabited by the Taino people, communities rich in culture and tradition. To Columbus, these people were subjects to convert, laborers to exploit, and obstacles to be removed. He took slaves, demanded tribute in gold, and unleashed brutality that would echo for centuries. Word of his discovery spread fast, though the land was not new, just new to Europe. Columbus returned with more ships and soldiers, launching a wave of conquest cloaked in the language of faith and civilization. The age of exploration had begun, and with it came death, disruption, and dispossession for indigenous peoples. Within 50 years of Columbus's landing, millions of Native Americans had died from violence and European diseases. Islands were depopulated, cultures were crushed. The encounter was not a meeting, it was a collision, and it marked the beginning of a conquest that would stretch across continents. In 1519, landed on the coast of Mexico with a small army and a big ambition, conquer the Aztecs and claim their gold. The Aztec Empire was vast, centered on Tenochtitlan, a city of canals, temples, and marketplaces more advanced than anything in Europe. But internal discontent and strategic alliances helped gain a deadly advantage. With the help of Melanson, an enslaved indigenous woman and translator, exploited rivalries between indigenous groups. Smallpox weakened the Aztec resistance before the final siege. By 1521, Tenochtitlan was burned, its emperor executed, and Spanish rule began. Temples were razed, idols smashed, and gold melted. The empire collapsed, not just from force, but from disease and betrayal. From its ashes, New Spain rose, a colony governed by European laws, but built on indigenous bones. And the conquest had only just begun. In the early 16th century, the Inca ruled a sprawling empire from the heights of Cusco to the coasts of Chile. Their road systems, terrace farming, and administration were unmatched in the Americas. But when Francisco Pizarro arrived in 1532, the empire was already wounded, not from war with Spain, but from a civil war between two Inca brothers. Atahualpa, the victor of that internal conflict, would soon face a more terrifying challenge. Pizarro met Atahualpa in Cajamarca, where the Spanish ambushed and captured him. Despite being offered a room filled with gold and silver as ransom, Pizarro had him executed anyway. Within a few years, the Inca capital of Cusco fell, and Spain took control of the empire's wealth and labor. The Inca gods were replaced with crucifixes, and their temples turned to cathedrals. Though remnants of Inca resistance continued, including the rebellion of Manco Inca, they were slowly crushed. The Andes became a land of forced conversions, and brutal labor in the mines of the Inca world had not been defeated by might alone. It was dismantled by disease, deceit, and division. What rose in its place was a colony of empire built on blood and silver. While Spain conquered the West, Portugal laid claim to the east of South America. In 1494, the Treaty of Tordesillas, sanctioned by the Pope, divided the New World between these two Catholic powers. Portugal's prize was Brazil, a land rich in forests, rivers, and indigenous tribes unfamiliar with European warfare. Initial contact was marked by curiosity and trade, Brazilwood, parrots, and feathers. But this soon gave way to slavery, sugar plantations, and the introduction of African labor. By the mid-1500s, millions of indigenous people had been killed or assimilated, while African slaves became the backbone of colonial Brazil's economy. Then, Jesuit missionaries swarmed the interior, converting indigenous people and building missions. Portuguese settlers expanded inland, driven by the search for gold and souls. The colonial society that formed was harsh and hierarchical, blending European, African, and indigenous influences. Brazil would become the most enduring and profitable colony in South America. The conquest of the Americas soon birthed another tragedy, one that would span oceans and generations. The Atlantic slave trade, Europeans needing labor to fuel sugar, cotton, and tobacco production, turned to Africa. Over 12 million Africans were kidnapped, shackled, and shipped across the Atlantic to work in brutal conditions. Brazil, the Caribbean, and southern colonies of North America became centers of slave-based economies. The infamous Middle Passage was a voyage of horror. Disease, suffocation, and suicide marked the journey. Many never made it, and those who did arrived as property, stripped of name, family, and identity. African cultures, songs, and beliefs, however, refused to die. In resistance and survival, enslaved people forged new identities and communities. From maroon societies in Jamaica to rebellions in Bahia, resistance was constant, even if rarely recorded. The slave trade made Europe rich, but at an immeasurable human cost. While Spain and Portugal dominated the south, the English turned their eyes to the north. In 1607, Jamestown became the first permanent English settlement, followed by Plymouth in 1620. The colonists came seeking wealth, religious freedom, or land, and found it by displacing indigenous nations. Tobacco and land hunger fueled expansion. As colonists pushed westward, violence with native tribes, like the Powhatan, became inevitable. Treaties were broken, lands seized, and populations decimated through disease and warfare. The English brought not only guns, but social structures, from private property to Protestantism. Slavery took root quickly, especially in the southern colonies. What began as scattered outposts evolved into a network of colonies built on indigenous dispossession and enslaved labor. By the 1700s, the British colonial world stretched from Canada to the Carolinas. While the Spanish and English carved out large territories, the French and Dutch built their own colonial enterprises. The French explored the Mississippi and St. Lawrence rivers, creating fur-trading empires based on partnerships with indigenous tribes. They founded cities like Quebec and New Orleans, and their presence reshaped both alliances and wars among native peoples. Unlike the English, the French often intermarried with indigenous communities. This alliance allowed them to thrive in the fur trade, which became central to their economy. But their colonies were smaller, less populated, and more dependent on native cooperation, which made them vulnerable. Meanwhile, the Dutch founded New Amsterdam, now New York, as a commercial hub. The Dutch West India Company controlled slave trade routes and Caribbean colonies. Though the English eventually overtook their North American holdings, Dutch influence remained in place names, architecture, and trade networks. Together, these smaller empires added complexity to the colonial struggle for dominance. The Spanish and Portuguese did not just bring swords, they brought crosses. The Catholic Church became a central force in colonization, with missionaries fanning across the continents. Jesuits, Franciscans, and Dominicans established missions from California to Patagonia, often forcibly converting entire villages. The goal was salvation, but the methods were domination. Native languages were banned, idols smashed, and sacred sites repurposed into churches. In this holy crusade, culture was not saved, it was overwritten. From the Guarani missions in Paraguay to the Franciscan efforts in Mexico, indigenous people were taught Christianity, Spanish, and labor obedience. Those who resisted were punished, sometimes burned as heretics, other times enslaved as rebels. Many missionaries believed they were protecting the natives, but often it was protection from a violence the church helped justify. Yet, within these missions, indigenous people found small ways to preserve their identity. They infused Catholic rituals with native rhythms, painted saints with brown faces, and passed on stories in whispers. Even under conversion and conquest, the spirit of their ancestors endured, but the world they had known was changed forever. Despite the overwhelming power of European empires, resistance never ceased. From the first moments of contact, indigenous peoples fought for their lands, cultures, and lives. In 1680, the Pueblo Revolt erupted in New Mexico, the most successful indigenous uprising in North American history. Led by the Pueblo people, drove the Spanish out for 12 years, reclaiming their religion and autonomy. In the Andes, Amaro II led a massive rebellion in 1780, blending Inca identity with anti-colonial rage. Though ultimately defeated, his execution sent a signal across the continent. Colonizers could be challenged. In Brazil, the Palmares Quilombo resisted Portuguese control for nearly a century, a society built by runaway slaves and indigenous allies. These stories were often erased from colonial narratives, but they lived on in oral histories and legend. Resistance was not just through war, but survival. Keeping a language alive, preserving ceremonies, remembering the old names. The colonizers wrote the official histories, but indigenous peoples never forgot their own. In the French colony of Saint-Domingue, the richest sugar colony in the world, a spark turned into an inferno. In 1791, enslaved Africans rose in rebellion. Inspired by the French Revolution's cry for liberty, they demanded their own. What followed was the only successful slave revolt in history, one that shook empires. Leaders like Toussaint Louverture, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, and Henri Christophe united enslaved peoples, freedmen, and rebels. They outmaneuvered French, Spanish, and British armies, transforming revolution into nationhood. By 1804, Haiti declared independence, becoming the first Black republic and the first post-colonial nation in the Western Hemisphere. The world reacted with terror. Slaveholding nations, including the US, refused recognition. But for millions of enslaved people across the Americas, Haiti was hope. The revolution broke the myth of white invincibility and forced the world to reckon with the violence of slavery. From the Caribbean to the Carolinas, fear of another Haiti would shape colonial policy for generations. By the mid-18th century, the British colonies in North America had grown strong and restless. Taxation without representation, restrictive trade laws, and British troops on colonial soil sparked outrage. In 1775, revolution exploded. What began as a protest became a war for independence. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and others led the rebellion, but freedom was never universal. Enslaved Africans were promised liberty by both sides, but received little. Native Americans, too, were divided, some siding with the British in hopes of halting westward expansion, others caught in the crossfire. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris recognized the United States. A new nation was born, but built on contradictions. Liberty was declared, yet slavery expanded. A republic emerged, while indigenous nations were pushed further west. The American Revolution changed global politics, inspiring uprisings elsewhere. But in many ways, it was a reshuffling of power rather than a true break from colonial systems. By the early 19th century, the colonies of Latin America stood on the edge of transformation. Inspired by the Enlightenment and revolutions in the US and Haiti, cries for independence echoed through the Andes and across the plains. Creoles Europeans born in the Americas sought to cast off Spanish rule, while indigenous and Afro-descendant populations demanded justice long denied. In Venezuela and Colombia, envisioned a united South America, Gran Colombia. In Argentina, Desan led his army across the Andes, liberating Chile and Peru. These leaders were hailed as liberators, but their revolutions were layered. Freedom, for some, often meant continued marginalization for others. By 1825, most Spanish colonies had declared independence, but what followed was not peace. Instead, civil wars, military juntas, and elite-controlled republics filled the power vacuum. The promise of liberty was often co-opted by the wealthy, and the legacy of colonization continued, just under new names and flags. As Spanish and Portuguese control crumbled, the old colonial order gave way to fragile republics. Mexico, after a brutal war for independence, declared itself a republic in 1821. Brazil followed a different path. Independence in 1822 came through negotiation, and it became a constitutional monarchy under Dom Pedro I. But independence did not erase the colonial blueprint. Social hierarchies based on race and class remained. European descended elites continued to dominate politics and economy, while indigenous and Afro-descendant populations remained marginalized and often violently repressed. Foreign powers, especially Britain and the US, quickly stepped in to influence these new republics. Economic imperialism replaced direct rule. Railroads, mining companies, and banana plantations became tools of soft domination. Freedom from Europe did not mean true autonomy. The ghost of empire still haunted every corner of the continent. Centuries after Columbus landed, the impact of colonization remains embedded in the fabric of the Americas. Borders drawn by imperial powers, languages imposed by conquerors, and wealth built on stolen land and enslaved labor continue to shape the modern hemisphere. Entire civilizations were destroyed, but others adapted, survived, and rebuilt. Today, debates rage over statues, names, reparations, and historical memory. Movements led by indigenous communities demand land rights, cultural recognition, and environmental protection. Afro-Latin and African American communities fight against structural racism born from the plantation system. And yet, there is resilience in every corner of the Americas. Languages once banned are being taught again. Rituals once suppressed are practiced proudly. The children of colonized peoples now write their own histories, reclaiming truths once buried beneath empire. The colonization of the Americas is not just history, it's living memory. It shaped borders, broke nations, and gave birth to new identities, often forged in blood and resistance. But the story does not end with conquest, it continues with reclamation. A new generation is asking hard questions, uncovering forgotten truths, and demanding that the past be told honestly. Thank you for joining us on this journey through 500 years of upheaval, courage, betrayal, and endurance. If this documentary moved you, taught you something new, or challenged your understanding, help us keep history alive. Hit the bell so you do not miss our next deep dive into the hidden chapters of our world. Together, let's uncover the past to build a better future.